This Hour Bible Theology Live, Episode 12 Two Kings, Saul and David. Today's episode deals briefly with the first two kings of ancient Israel, Saul from the tribe of Benjamin and David from the tribe of Judah. The book of 1 Samuel, chapters 8 and 9, gives the two opinions that ancient Israelites had about monarchy. We are in the time of Judges, which followed the conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua, the topic of episode 11. The period of Judges, spreading over 100 years, 1150 before Christ and 1050 before Christ, was a difficult time when ancient Israelite confederation of 12 tribes recently settled in Canaan was menaced and harassed by the Philistines, a branch of mega invasion of the sea peoples coming from the island of Kaftor, Crete of today, and founding a pentapolis of fortresses in the Levant, eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea. From here, the Philistines were attacking the Israelite tribes. During this period of time, there was no political unified monarchy, but rather confederation of tribes under the command of several charismatic military leaders called in the Hebrew Bible shofetim, Hebrew meaning judges, raised or called by God to defend his people Israel. Judges were temporary military leaders who have never established a leading dynasty. They were called by God in times of foreign invasions, and when the difficulties ceased, they returned to their initial occupations, for example, farmers. Among the 12 judges mentioned in the book of Judges, we list here the best known: Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, a female judge who was at the same time a female prophet, one of the 5 female prophets mentioned in the Old Testament, then Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. The book of 1 Samuel shows that the ancient Israelites were divided into two groups regarding the need of a dynastic kingship to replace the charismatic temporary leaders called judges. So 1 Samuel 8, chapter and verses 8 to 42 presents a negative view on monarchy, while 1 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 10 has a positive view on the same topic. 1 Samuel 8 reads, quote, "The king will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots," end quote. Eventually, the positive view prevailed, hence the establishment of the monarchic system with Saul from the tribe of Benjamin as the very first king of Israel. In this episode, I will dwell on two kings, Saul and David. First, King Saul. His name Saul in Hebrew means asked or prayed for. Saul was the first king of the United Monarchy. His reign usually dated back for 1050 to 1010 before Christ, marked the transition from a tribal society ruled by judges, those military leaders, to an organized statehood, a monarchy of sorts. All the information about King Saul comes exclusively from Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, with no supporting archaeological evidence. According to 1 Samuel, Saul was anointed as king by prophet Samuel, one of the functions of the Israelite prophets being to anoint kings over the people. In the time of Saul, there was a unified state, but rather a confederation of tribes united by a single king, Saul reigning from Gibeah, his own town, no capital at all, as it would be with Jerusalem at the time of David. According to the Old Testament, Saul reigned for 2 years, but biblical scholars agree that he reigned for 20 or 22 years. According to the New Testament, Acts chapter 13, verse 21, St. Paul tells us that Saul reigned for 40 years. He had several kids, among whom the best known are Jonathan, who will become the best friend of David, and Michal, who will become the wife of David. Michal remained childless because she despised David when he danced naked in front of the Ark of Covenant, bringing the Ark of Covenant to the city of Jerusalem. After several military successes, Saul did a few mistakes which will bring the end of his reign and the end of his life. During Saul's campaign against the Philistines, Samuel told Saul that he will arrive in 7 days to perform some ritual sacrifices. But after a week, Saul lost his patience in waiting for Samuel, and he prepared for the battle, bringing some sacrifices to God. Samuel arrives when Saul just finished the ritual sacrifices and reprimands Saul for not observing his instructions. Another mistake. Several years later, Samuel instructs Saul to battle the Amalekites and to destroy all of them, including the livestock. However, Saul does not observe Saul's instructions. Samuel prophesies that God will take the kingdom away from Saul due to these mistakes. Then Samuel leaves Saul behind him, and the two never meet again. At God's behest, Samuel goes to Bethlehem, and arriving at the house of Jesse, Samuel asks him to see his 7 sons. The youngest one is David, who was tending his father's flock. When he was brought in front of Samuel, the prophet anoints David in private as the next king to replace Saul, who was still alive. 1 Samuel chapter 16 tells us that King Saul was troubled by an evil spirit sent by God, and he asked some calming music, and one of Saul's servants recommended David, the son of Jesse from Bethlehem, known for his musical skills as a harpist. David comes to Saul to be his armor bearer and help him with the harp playing. During a battle by Saul with the Philistines, David, who could stand up against the giant Philistine Goliath, killing the giant with a single shot from a sling. After this victory, David's popularity among people grew greatly, which made Saul jealous of his servant, whom he viewed as a rival to his throne. Nevertheless, Saul's son, Jonathan, and David become close friends. At least 2 times, Saul threw a spear at David, trying to kill him. Gradually, Saul is plotting against David, which determined the latter to abandon Saul's household and find refuge in the wilderness of Judah. Saul sent his people after David, but these, surrounded by 300 unsatisfied people, some of them outlaws, succeeds to escape from the traps that Saul prepared. The Battle of Gilboa. The Philistines make again battle with the Israelite tribes, and Saul leads the army. Before the main battle, Saul goes to a witch in Endor, asking about the next day battle's outcome. The witch summons up a spirit, which appears to be Prophet Samuel, who was dead now, who tells Saul that God rejected him and he will not hear his prayers, and that his kingdom will go to David, and that the next day Saul will lose his kingdom and his life on the battlefield. During the next day battle with the Philistines at Mount Gilboa, Saul committed suicide, falling on his own sword and dying along with his 3 sons. Saul's son, Ishbosheth, succeeded him, reigning for 2 years until he was murdered by his own officers. Saul's son-in-law, David, became the next king. Now a few words about King David. Much of David's life was unfolded in parallel with Saul's reign. I will insist here only on a few events in David's life which merits our attention. King David was originally from Bethlehem, a little town in Judah, a few miles south of Jerusalem. King David reigned after Saul, and his one son, Ishbosheth, short reign. David reigned perhaps between 1010 and 970 before Christ as king of the unified monarchy with the capital in Jerusalem. His name David in Hebrew means beloved one. Besides the Old Testament, the name David appears in a 9th century before Christ inscription, Tel Dan inscription, in the phrase Beit David, house of David. The name appears also in the 8th century before Christ, Meshach king Moab's inscription as house of David. After the death of Saul, David is anointed king by his own tribe, the tribe of Judah, and eventually by all the 12 tribes of Israel. In order to solidify the tribal unity in one state or monarchy, David has the genial idea to choose as capital of his new state a city which did not belong to any of the 12 tribes' apportioned lands, a neutral city which was a Canaanite fortress, Zion. In Hebrew, Zion means fortress, that David has first conquered from the hands of the Canaanites. This is the city of Salem, mentioned in all the Akkadian tablets, the tablets from Tel Amarna, Egypt, dating back to 1400s before Christ, a city of Salem, and Semitic, meaning prosperity, and perhaps dedicated to a deity of prosperity by name Salem. David conquers the city of Salem from the Canaanites and changes its name in Hebrew, Yerushalayim, city of Salem. Then David brings the Ark of Covenant into the new city and plans to build a sanctuary to shelter that precious object symbolizing the presence of God in the midst of his people. First, prophet Nathan encourages David to build the sanctuary, but later, during the night, he has a vision in which God sends his prophet back to David to tell him that the sanctuary will be built by King Saul and not by David. Now it is the time when prophet Nathan delivers an important prophecy regarding David's kingship and the dynasty that he initiated. The prophecy is found in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. And I will read it. Quote, "And when your days, says Nathan to David, are over and you fall asleep with your ancestors, I shall appoint your heir, your own son, to succeed you, and I shall make his sovereignty secure. He will build a temple for my name, and I shall make his royal throne secure forever. I shall be a father to him, and he a son to me. If he does wrong, I shall punish him with a rod, such as men use, with blows, such as mankind gives. But my faithful love, kesed in Hebrew, will never be withdrawn from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your dynasty and your sovereignty will ever stand firm before me, and your throne be forever secure." End quote. First, God makes David's dynasty eternal. Second, God promises to David that he will be a father to each king coming from his dynasty. Third, even though God will punish the kings of the dynastic line of David for their sins, God will never withdraw his faithful love, in Hebrew kesed, unconditional love, from the Davidic dynasty. This is unconditional love that God promises to David's dynasty. And historically, this really happened. Unlike the northern monarchy, the kingdom of Israel, where Ephraim and Lord, where we have 9 dynasties in the period of 930 to 722 before Christ. The southern kingdom, or the kingdom of Judah, knew only one single dynasty, that of David, in the period of its existence between 930 and 586 before Christ. The patristic interpreter saw in this text, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16, a messianic prophecy hinting at the eternal reign of King Messiah coming from the Davidic dynasty. Among the sins of King David, we need to mention here the adultery that he committed with Bathsheba, the wife of his servant Uriah the Hittite. In order to have Bathsheba as his wife, David arranges the death of Bathsheba's husband, the Uriah the Hittite, thus committing murder or homicide. The question is, with so many sins and some of them mortal, like adultery and murder, David was portrayed as a man according to God's heart. 1 Samuel 13:14, while God was seeking someone to replace King Saul. By contrast, Saul, a man with less important moral flaws, he did not observe the Kerem law and did not exterminate the Amalekites. He lost his kingdom for this minor flaw and his own life. Why such a discrepancy between the two divine attitudes, one of favor shown to David and another of disapproval shown to Saul? What makes David, in spite of all his sins and character flaws, to be a man according to God's heart? Or in other words, what made God to look with favor to his servant David? The answer to this conundrum may be found in 2 Samuel chapters 15, 16, and 17. We learn from these scriptures that David's son Absalom rebelled against his father. Absalom began by judging the claims of David's servants while criticizing his father and the royal entourage that they were not doing their job. This way, Absalom owned the Israelites' hearts. 4 years later, Absalom asked David the permission to go to Hebron in south and bring ritual sacrifices to Yahweh. Absalom asked Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to join him in Hebron, while sending messengers to the 12 tribes of Israel, telling them that, quote, Absalom is king at Hebron. A messenger came and informed David that his son's conspiracy grew up and many people are now with Absalom. David had 2 options: either to crush the growing up rebellion done by his son or to abandon the royal palace. He chose actually the second option. We see David leaving his palace accompanied by his friends, officers and priests, along with the high priest Zadok, and heading towards the Kidron Valley, which separates the Mount of Olives from the Mount, actually, hill of Zion. In Kidron Valley, they stopped, and David led all his retinue to pass by the Ark of Covenant, heading towards the wilderness. Then he asked Zadok to bring the Ark of Covenant back to Jerusalem. King David shows a complete surrender to God's will when he says to Zadok, quote, the king then said to Zadok, take the Ark of God back into the city. Should I win Yahweh's favor, he will bring me back and allow me to see it and its tent once more. But should he say, you displease me, here I am. Let him treat me as he sees fit. End quote. 2 Samuel 15:25 through 26. Now David climbed Mountain of Olives, showing us his genuine humbleness. Quote, David then made his way up to the Mountain of Olives, weeping as he went, his head covered and his feet bare. And all people with him had their heads covered and made their way up, weeping as they went. End quote. 2 Samuel 15:30. On his way towards the wilderness, David encounters Shimei from the house of Saul. Shimei cursed David and threw stones at David and all his retinue. And Shimei shouted at David, quote, off with you, man of blood, scoundrel, end quote. 2 Samuel 16:7. Abishai, one of David's officers, asked the king to allow him to kill the blasphemer, but David again shows his humbleness and surrender to God's will, saying, quote, let him curse. If Yahweh has said to him, curse David, what right has anyone to say, why have you done so? Perhaps Yahweh will look on my wretchedness and will repay me with good for his curses today. 2 Samuel 16:10 and 12. Summing up, it was David's genuine humbleness, dependability on God, and utter surrender to the divine will that made God to consider David, in spite of all his flaws, a man according to God's heart.
Efra